You're on the air. Don't say anything crazy. I've just burnt through a pound of sage.
Sage
in the process of this podcast.
What the hell has that done to your psychic quality right now?
Well, my psychic and spiritual abilities are improving exponentially as this sage burns. My curtains are burnt to a crisp. My landlord's...
Isn't sage what you serve with the lamb?
My landlord's issuing an eviction notice because of the fire hazard. But spiritually, I'm doing very well right now.
That's perfect. You're without a home, but inside you found, I suppose, an internal home. You feel at ease, and I think you should feel at liberty to burn sage wherever you please.
I think so. And as you say there, internally, as Alan Watts said, you can find inner spiritual sanctum by looking from within.
Wow. I love Alan Watts. I often fall asleep listening to Alan Watts' sort of musings. He's a very learned man. I wish he was still around. I feel like the world could do with a bit of Watts energy.
Yeah, I think so, man. Oh man, Alan Watts. I was introduced to him from a really good friend back in 2013, and at the time, man, I hadn't been introduced to any of these kind of concepts. I knew nothing about Buddhism or anything like that. I knew nothing about, in my mind, I was a scientific, I'm a materialist, someone who was just pure science based. And I wasn't happy about entertaining anything mildly spiritual, mildly metaphysical. I would have dismissed any of that as woo-woo.
You're an empirical man that demands evidence. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. Statistical salesman.
Salesman, analytical. Where's the data? Show me the data.
Show me the data, and I'll show you the money. But honestly, man, I really believe a lot of people could do with a good dose of Alan Watts, because I think he's a great way to introduce non-spiritual people who perhaps are a little bit interested in the monotheistic religions, or perhaps people who are raised, Protestant or Catholic or Muslim, to really get into those kind of brainwaves.
Well, I think he's more than that, man. He's almost like, I suppose, the West's East portal to the Eastern philosophies. Buddhism, a lot of the sort of mentalities that pervade some of the Asian philosophies. Buddhism, whether that is, and certainly not. He's quite critical, actually, of a lot of Western civilization, the kind of things that we see as, I suppose, self-evident. He questions down to the ground and then flips them on their head and looks at it from because I suppose there's almost a yin and yang against Western sort of empirical, evidence-based philosophy. I suppose that's grounded in Greek philosophy ultimately, which is kind of just puts rationale and reasoning above all else, whereas sort of Easterning is in touch with the soul and the spiritual, and maybe just a feeling of maybe how you feel or experience the world is maybe more important than drilling down into the root causes of everything.
Yeah, actually, that's so beautiful the way you put that, drilling down into the root causes of everything.
Yes.
Because there's a quality, isn't there, to Buddhism of just, I wouldn't say it's stoicism, but it's taking life as it comes,
exactly,
and accepting it,
and not needing to strip away the beauty to understand what lies beneath, and kind of just taking it on face value as beautiful, as opposed to being like, how does the wings of a butterfly operate? The muscle must contract to operate the up motion. There must be an equal and opposite reaction to make it fly. But yes, there must be. It's sometimes what a tragic way to think, right?
Waste.
Why can't you just,
what a fucking waste.
What a waste, exactly. Just perceive it as it was meant to be perceived. It's almost like, are you infringing on God's blueprint by seeing what's beneath?
That's interesting. Yeah. Do you think that's what people? Do you think that's why people are so critical of Eastern philosophy, because it digs below what people would perceive as God's blueprint, God's plan.
I suppose maybe that's why Eastern philosophy may see sort of not much utility in the Western way of looking down to the root cause and causality of everything, down to the sort of level of particles. But then, you can't. I think ultimately for me it boils down to almost being able to seesaw between the two when it suits you and for the appropriate context. Because kind of when you're just sitting there in the French Alps and perceiving a beautiful view, you kind of don't want to be delving into how this blade of grass came to be. You just kind of, it is, and you enjoy the view as it is, and it comes to you, and it's sort of by delving too much into it and thinking too much into it just detracts from the beauty of the moment. So I think, but there are times, and there's a time and space for drilling down into root causes, and obviously that yields insights that can drive technology and perpetuate the human race forward. I think it's science, ultimately evidence-based research is the foundation of a lot of what we enjoy nowadays. So we can't knock it too much. There's a time and a place. No. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. There's a time and a place, because you've got to really place value in the times where we can spend hours and months and years drilling into modern medicine or technologies, artificial intelligence, things that can propel efficiencies and the general health of the human and the animal population. And that's so important. But there's definitely a quality to the Alan Watts school that talks about, you don't think about breathing, you just do it.
Right,
and
that's right.
Taking that very simple principle and applying it to, say, reading. I don't know. This is a bit of a problem for me. Like when I read, I'm thinking, I want to get to the next page. I want to get to the next chapter, and then I want to get to the next book. And that's happened to me a few times, quite more than a few times. Whereas maybe I should be taking that principle and just being purely and beautifully in the moment on, every letter, every word, just enjoying that book to the max. I don't know. Do you ever have that problem?
Absolutely. You're egging towards the end analysis and the conclusion of a conflict, which is typically what a good story is, right? It's a conflict, and then the resolution of a conflict is the conclusion, and your mind almost preempts what the conclusion could be because it's only natural to do so. But I think it's very tempting to do that, and all too easy to do that. But I think, it detracts from the moment and the joy of each page and each word and the moment and the emotions that are evoked on that page. And you've got to just be in that to, I suppose, fully enjoy it, because it's otherwise it detracts from the experience. And I think the same goes for life. You can kind of draw that same analogy, right?
You can apply that to so many things. I mean, one that's, I'd say, a major talking point is thoughts. Thinking. Alan Watts always said the biggest issue is thinking about thoughts. People are thinking too much about their own thoughts, and
it's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
It's
thinking
so
about
meta.
thinking. No, how many layers are there to it? But it's true, and I think it's the root of a lot of anxiety, and especially when you sort of the advent of overt comparison via social media, that sort of thing. That only kind of perpetuates thoughts upon thoughts and sort of unhealthy comparison, which then leads to unsavory thoughts. But there's also Alan Watts sort of described. You spoke about the book. It's there to be enjoyed on any given page, on every given word. It was a song, and you were supposed to be dancing, not sort of perpetual. Otherwise, the best symphonies would be the ones that ended quickest.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I believe there's a cartoon that the guys from South Park did on that.
Yes,
and
it's really good.
Like it was a conductor, and he was conducting at lightning speed, and then the symphony ended, in a second. Yes. It's like, oh, that must be the best one because it was, it ended quickest. There's so much truth in
We're all tending to the same end, right? We're all gonna die, and although we don't like to think about that too much, it's ultimately where our ultimate, I suppose, destination is, and it's kind of we decide what we do in between. And you can make that as poetic and beautiful, or risk averse, or I mean, it's your story to write. I think that can be sort of terrifying and liberating in equal measure, but for me it's quite liberating.
Oh yes, I think so. Well, some people have referred to life as a single player game, which I kind of like the weird sort of virtual reality, but actually it's reality interpretation of life. and you have all these colors and these sounds, and you're being bombarded, and it's up to you to interpret those, in a way that you see fit, that brings you happiness and joy. And that's coming back to the Jeffersonian term, pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and not happiness, but the pursuit of happiness. How you interpret that is completely up to you. We're all going to reach that same end destination, which is death. So once you embrace that, and you fear less, it's difficult to not fear it at all because of the mental baggage and the attachments that we have. But once you embrace that, then I think that's quite a liberating thing for that single player life game.
I think so. I think you can see it in one of two ways, but I think for some people it's paralyzing, but hopefully for most people it's quite liberating in that sort of there's this end in sight, and it's going to happen no matter what, so you may as well have fun in between and do whatever you want to do. And there's sort of tried get dogma, whether that's sort of the prevailing social economic dogma or religious or whatever, to not try and to drive your decisions too much on an individual day-to-day level. And so hopefully you kind of create your own individual philosophy, and whether that means adopting large sections of other dogma, that's fine, but it's whatever I suppose yields you results in your pursuits.
Yeah,
I know it's like a super individualistic sort of approach, and I suppose that resonates strongly with the American population, largely with Western society. There's not the idea so much of collectivism and sort of the bringing up of society as a whole, but I suppose if we all look after ourselves individually first, kind of look after, put ourselves first and live the best lives we can and be the best versions of ourselves in every sense, then that surely lifts society as a whole by definition.
Yeah, there's that politician, I forget his name, but he made a similar comment about where you are on the left or right political spectrum, and when you're talking about your immediate family, he's a communist. When he's talking about his friendship group, he's a socialist, and people in his neighborhood, he's a socialist. When it comes to people in his state, he's a conservative, and then on like the federal level, the nationwide level, he'd be a libertarian. And that, I think that resonates somewhat, if I'm reading you correctly there, I think that resonates somewhat with what you're saying, that you're caring for yourself and the ones directly around you. It's difficult to extend that to perhaps a nationwide level or a statewide or a provincially wide level. But if you take that belief on your immediate circle, then you're going to be generally governing yourself in a positive way. A lot of people would disagree with that. A lot of people would really disagree with that, but I think there's something to that. Yeah.
I think if you're disciplining yourself on the individual level first, I think that's the only place you can start, really, because I don't think you can go around spouting advice and ways, or sort of even protesting about a given cause until you've kind of got your own house in order. And you can mean that literally. So Jordan Peterson talks about making the very domain of your immediate environment orderly, because without sort of putting your room, your house, and by extension then society in order, you kind of don't start until you're not in a position to be spouting morals and ways the society should govern itself, and sort of the best, most most sort of aspirational, or what aspirations should be, without sort of, I suppose, putting your first yourself first, and therefore putting your own immediate environment in order. And it's quite liberating because it's so tangible, right? You can quite quickly put your room in order, and that automatically has a positive feedback loop on how you feel, and that can hopefully perpetuate better feelings and more bigger picture thinking. But it starts small.
It does start small, and those small things are very doable, aren't they? Making that phone call to your grandmother once a week, or making sure that your room is spick and span, or maybe tending to your garden and doing some weeding. Those things are very, very doable and tangible. I mean, even in times like this, we're talking about very strange times right now with this pandemic, where we're limited socially, we're limited in so many ways. it's interesting that those small jobs and approaches to a good life and being good to others and yourself is not that out of reach.
Well, yeah, I suppose tending to your own plot is more important than ever before, because sort of that your internal or immediate plots become that much bigger part of, or bigger, has taken up a bigger proportion of your life than ever before, because you're confined, because you're not going out as much, because you're not seeing as many people as you did before, and not having the usual social interactions. So yeah, I think it sort of stands true more than ever that you should tend to sort of what's immediately within your environment and do your best to make it beautiful, make it a productive workspace, a workout place, and sort of tend to both mental and body aspects, so the physical and the mental. And I think for me, it certainly makes sense to start with the physical, because that's almost the more tangible out of the two. And so for me, it was starting to run on a regular basis, and that sort of then comes back as a virtuous circle in terms of a feedback loop. I feel better, I've got more energy, therefore I'm in a better mental state already, just by token of running. And yeah, I think it starts there. But it's like you said, because we're in such strange times, this pandemic, this sort of 1 in 100-year event, I think it's so much the case that we need to be careful about our thoughts and careful around how we govern our space, and maybe introduce more discipline than ever before. Because when you make your environment a productive environment and a beautiful environment to be in, and sort of minimalist with minimal distraction, and able to therefore sort of better divide your day up and schedule it, because I think a schedule is very important to keeping a healthy mental state. To do that, you it's almost a self it's a reinforcing circle. So you make the environment around you good, and then the environment around you makes you feel better in turn, and it's it's a virtuous circle.
It's an Ouroboros, some would say.
Ouroboros.
It's an Ouroboros. The snake eats its tail.
The snake eats its tail. It represents many things, that
Ouroboro. Yeah, the Ouroboros. I think if I was ever to get a tattoo, it would be the Ouroboros. Or it would be the wave representation of the Ouroboros. There's a different representation that was popular in Japan, and it was actually a wave, like a self-perpetuating wave.
Wow.
Which I think aesthetically looks better. But yeah, the Ouroboros is an interesting concept, because it's applicable in negative situations. It's applicable in positive situations where people's lives have created positive feedback loops, like the one you were just describing, Brother Bear. It's definitely useful in different situations. One I would say is the corporate trap that people get into, or perhaps a lot of people enjoy that corporate trap, but the sort of the climbing the company ladder, and people do it through academic circles, and they do it in the real world when they get to a corporate structure, and they are constantly climbing the ladder, and they're never really there. It never gets there. It's all retch and no vomit, as Alan Watts would say. And then eventually they get to a very high position. They don't feel any different to how they did at the very beginning of the journey.
Yes.
And that's an Ouroboros. That's an Ouroboros in the sense that the snake is eating its it's a cyclical process you go through, where you start where you finish where you start. What do you think about that, Brother Bear?
I think the idea of a cycle and some level of rhythm to everything. I suppose the universe is run on rhythms, right? Night and day. I suppose it's run in duality and polar opposites, right? The polarization of the universe is pervasive. It's everywhere. You get between night and day, sun, moon, happy, sad, North Pole, South Pole, everything. There is a polarity to everything, it seems. And it seems that polarity seems to go quite deep down to the neutrons, where you have positrons and almost antimatter and matter, and I think it's interesting for sort of every particle that's positively charged, you get a negatively charged, and so on. And yeah, I did speak to someone about this, and they did say that they've certainly seen people who I suppose tend towards those sort of aspirations that we see as good in the West in terms of climbing up the corporate ladder, and maybe they're not aware of that polarity, and potentially that these aspirations of theirs are fairly vacuous once they arrive, if you like. So there will be partners who've climbed the ladder, and maybe done very well for themselves and actually met all the criteria they were looking for, but in the meantime they've gone through a divorce and their children don't like them.
So it's almost like, what was it all for? Was any of this worth the struggle, really?
Yeah, and probably if you boil it down, it would be like a net zero, because the matter count exactly balances out the antimatter, so you've kind of gone nowhere, and it's a net zero. What was it all for? But no, I think the key to this was sort of the, I suppose, moral of the story, if you like, is that we have to seek some form of balance, and this speaks to the yin and yang, and you have to walk the Tao. Or is it Tao? Is it the Tao?
Yeah,
or is it
the
it's certainly, anyway, the Tao,
Yeah.
yes. So Alan Watts talks about this again. Back to Alan Watts, he's always relevant. About walking the way between yin and yang, and it's that line that straddles the border essentially between yin and yang, that very thin but perfectly balanced tightrope you need to walk in order to, I suppose, enjoy life in all of its spectrums. But it's like in allowing enough chaos into your life so you can kind of be take enough risk to sort of invite risk into your life, but also not too much whereby risk can quite kind of too much of an appetite for risk quite quickly descend into chaos.
That's very well put. I think walking the Tao does invite risk-averse, routine-based behavior, which is really, really important for productivity. Once you've got your formula, once you've got a formula for life that works, or a formula for that sequence of your life that works, but then definitely having an element of chaos or an element of risk is useful. And it's so interesting from person to person what that looks like, because it seems that like for a lot of people that was drugs, like that's always been drugs or drinking a lot. And I know we were discussing this the other week, with people who were, company men and women, but they use a lot of cocaine and things like that. And I feel like whether they're aware of it or not, in like the Taoist sense, that's the chaotic side, their chaotic side breaking through, because when they're sober, the routine and the revenue targets and all those metrics have such a stranglehold on their life. So I'd say there's definitely parallels to be made there. I don't know. I think being sober for a little bit, as in just averting, basically avoiding any alcohol or anything like that, is a great way to experience the yin and yang, in the sense that you get to feel everything. Because I think alcohol in particular in society, and for a lot of people, marijuana is used as a numbing, sort of a numbing agent, something that can, Pink Floyd talk about, comfortably numb, the ability to drink and do marijuana to celebrate when you're really happy, or to numb the pain when something really bad happens. I think there's some real Taoist value in actually avoiding that, even if it's just for 3 months, even if it's just for 6 months, something like that, but cutting that out just to experience feeling everything, and in the true Buddhist sense, feeling all the suffering and all the positives as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. So it almost just baselines you in this sort of mediocre position of kind of never being truly happy, never being truly sad. And that is a shame, I think, in and of itself, right? Because life is not all happy, and actually part of life is sort of experiencing the full spectrum of emotions. And if you sort of just quiver around the baseline of neither here nor there, and like you say, sort of comfortably numb, it's not a full spectrum of life you're experiencing, and those emotions are there to be experienced, I feel. Even if they are negative, and even if you do cry, I think in some sense there's something poetic about that, right? And I think it's sort of these dopamine fixes, whether that's drugs or social media, it seems to sort of just keep you at this weird baseline, but never on the extremes. And I think it's maybe where at the extremes that we find most growth and most joy and most despair. But also I think it's a shame not to go to those extremes, because they're there to sort of almost be met or hit. Not as targets, but it'd be a shame not to.
So you think when we reach the extremes, that's where you experience the most growth, the most emotional and intellectual growth?
Yeah, I think the extremes of anything, when you push yourself that extra mile on your run, or whether you sort of do those extra few hours at work, it's those extremes that, I mean, it's the old cheesy saying, if you don't push yourself out of your comfort zone, you don't grow, but there's a huge amount of truth in that. If you only stay in your comfort zone, I think at best you stagnate. At worst, you probably more likely than not, you're actually going to retreat and sort of almost fold into yourself.
Yeah,
you don't want that. So I just think it's almost desirable to experience. Well, it sounds silly saying this, but of course it's desirable to experience the full spectrum of emotion in life, and whether that's up or down. And I think there's lessons to be learnt, and a lot more lessons and more important lessons to be learnt more quickly earlier on at the extremes of the emotions, if there are the circumstances that do so. And I don't think we should shy away from those circumstances, but sort of like a ship doesn't face the wave on side on, you sort of face it head on and smash through, and you come out a stronger person.
Definitely, yeah. That's that's definitely food for thought. Pushing yourself, taking risks and measured risks, I suppose, to stimulate some kind of spiritual growth or emotional growth. You mentioned social media a couple of times there, and I did want to talk to you about misinformation, actually, because
fake news.
Sure, fake news, or just too much news.
Fake news
alert. But just not enough capacity to deal with so much information and news. I mean, that's what I wanted to have a little talk with you about. And I also wanted to, actually, before we go on to that, I did want to, I think it's definitely worth talking about the thing we were discussing before about too many thoughts. Thoughts on thoughts and thinking about thoughts, the stuff that Alan Watts talks about. And I do believe that there's like an issue with the human condition that's rooted in too many thoughts, and almost worshipping intellectuals or academics, or it could even be sort of your cult leaders or anyone like that gives you too much information, but also keeps things just vague enough to keep you there. And I feel like that's going on in our universities, and I feel like that's going online in terms of our gurus. Your sort of financial and strange gurus that are popping up all over the internet.
Yes.
I'm kind of meandering here a bit, but I hope you're getting like the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Please meander like the Amazon River. Please, I love it. Physical geography, it's great. We didn't do it, but we respect it because it's a science apparently, which it's not. This is part of the pseudo guru. No, we love it. My brother did it, and he did a very good job, and I'm very proud of him.
I didn't know your brother did physical. He did physical geography, did he?
Physical geography. Yeah, he did. So he did very well indeed, and we're all very proud of him. Shout out to Seb.
Good lad. Well done, Seb.
Well
done, Sebby.
Good. So back to your point. So I think we're probably facing a crisis of, I suppose, pseudo gurus and charlatans all over the shop. Whether that's academia, whether that's sort of financial advice. I think probably social media has only served to accelerate this phenomenon. We spoke about pseudo gurus in our last podcast, which I absolutely loved. That was a great podcast with Jen. But I think the issue goes a lot deeper than simply cults. I think it's kind of the pervasiveness of all information, the ability to publish anything anywhere, almost in and of itself will inevitably lead to a hell of a lot of misinformation out there, because there's so much more of it. Therefore, a bigger proportion is kind of, if you're going to just increase the amount, the percentage by definition, maybe even if it stays the same, the quantity will increase, right? So yeah, and I think it's probably the ability, and the platforms offer them an ability to pump this information, and it's very effective ways of doing it, right? Because you're reaching an insane population, ultimately uncapped, so it could get an unbelievable amount of views for very little overhead in terms of licensing the platform or anything like that. So I think as much good as it's perpetuated, it's also it's an impossible question. I don't think I've got the answer as to how you police that. How do you I know there was a patent or something, or a request raised by Elon Musk around creating a platform that would try and deal with this sort of issue, and I suppose it would be fundamentally AI driven, and would try and root out the fake news and hopefully create a safer and fairer. But then you're like, well, who controls the algorithm and who controls the AI, and how does it decide what's true, what's not? So yeah, and what's pseudo news, what's actual. So yeah, I think it's a difficult line to tread, because you kind of, if you keep boiling the root cause down to the end, you're always going to find a human at the end of the chain, and kind of what values that human holds dear will probably in large part dictate what the algorithm does, or that collection of human beings, or the culture of the company, right? So it's kind of like, what level do you want to look at it?
Right. Well, look at the Silicon Valley bubble, and I think there's definitely they will admit it themselves. There's sort of a liberal dominance in terms of how they vet information and what they choose to publish, and that whether that's genuine or not is another discussion, because some would say that they really pursue that because it's more marketable to be a liberal company. You're reaching the highest number of followers, the highest number of people. Just by definition, you're not going to be alienating certain groups. But still, that isn't like an all neutral algorithm. There's a company culture. There's the culture of the Silicon Valley bubble that is influencing the information we perceive.
Yes.
And everything. I mean, there's when someone gets shot at a protest in America, which happened a month ago, when that hit the news, it was covered in about 24 different ways about who did the shooting, who instigated it, what the kind of people were like involved in the situation. And it's just so messy. It's so much information, and I don't feel like my brain, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but I don't feel like my brain has the capacity to even make a judgment call when there's that much information and nearly all of it's conflicting.
Well, that's the thing. I think because you've got that many more sources to deal with now. Back in maybe the 20s and 30s, there were maybe a few reputable newspapers, and for some reason back then, people didn't question it, I suppose, because there was only those reputable sources of information and news, and so you took that on face value, and you didn't sort of delve into questioning everything. Unfortunately, it's a natural evolution, right? There will be new iterations of news and ways information is, I suppose, passed and dissected and disseminated, destroyed. But yes, I think just the sheer number of sources we're seeing and the sort of the amount of information we're exposed to now is just overwhelming, and our brains have had nowhere near enough time to catch up with the, I suppose, circuitry required to sort of process this amount of information in a healthy and steady way, and also able to file it and assimilate it and make some sort of, I suppose, conclusion, draw conclusions from it. Because I don't think you can, because some insane statistic, like there's more information in a single metro newspaper. For those who don't know, it's just a standard tube newspaper you get in London on the trains. There's more information than that than someone in the medieval era would be exposed throughout their whole lifetime.
That's crazy. That's believable, because if you think of the Metro or any major broadsheet or even a tabloid, believe it or not, cover to cover, that's a lot of text. It's a lot of information and images.
Well, the thing is, man, it's not that much, because compared to like what someone would be exposed to in medieval era, it's really not that crazy, especially when you compare it to digital media. So that's kind of like the analog version of digital media, and even that was more information than anyone was exposed to in a lifetime in the medieval era. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think sort of the bits per second, we're not quite there yet in terms of the hardware of our brains, but obviously the software. And the virtual space, social media has kind of not really thought about that, and you can't blame them, because why would they?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, are we even ready for the car at this point? Like the amount of incidents and accidents there are with vehicles, the amount of drunk drivers. You could make the argument that, are we even prepared for that kind of technology? Let alone the internet. The internet is like playing with fire. Is like we've discovered fire. We're trying to adapt it to the best of our abilities. We're trying to innovate with it, which is definitely the right thing to do. But there's so much trial and error, and there's so much destruction and misinformation that comes with that. Man, I just feel like the result of that, we're in that. I mean, I know in the past we've had discussions, and you've expressed sort of you've definitely expressed some sadness that we are in just the very nascent phases of the internet and space travel, and all these technologies that have come to the fore, and they're definitely in our grasp, but we're nowhere near realizing their true potential. We're nowhere near channeling their energy in an effective way, or a way that's in tune with harmony for the human race. I mean, the internet's a prime example, just giving how divisive it's made everybody. You have the rabbit hole effect with the way that the algorithms work, the mechanisms behind that. And I think it's really frightening right now. We're getting up to the US election. It's going to be in, a month and a half, really. No, less than that, a month and 8 days, I think it is, or 9 days. And it's just going to be more and more division in the lead up to that. And I do think that the way the algorithms are structured is definitely a contributing factor.
Yeah, definitely. There was a whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, wasn't there, around how they were utilizing personal data to sort of do tailored marketing, bespoke marketing, almost based on your context and your views, and sort of illegally so harnessing way too much personal data to sort of target people, I suppose, whether they were more susceptible to Republican or Democratic inclinations. But yeah, I think it's very interesting how that election is going to unfold. I think you can safe to say this far from the two best human beings we could put forward for the job, but it is what it is, and let's see what happens. I think the debate, isn't it tonight, Leo?
I don't know. I haven't been following it at all.
No, it is. It is.
It is?
Yeah, I'm sure it is tonight, yeah.
Will you be tuning in?
Be quite entertaining, won't it?
Yeah, I think so. God, I've got to
Brother
see.
Bear, so sorry, because before I just forget that train of thought, because you kicked off something in the back there where you were saying about, yes, I was rather nascent indeed, because
you were sad. You were sad about it. We had a discussion in your garage.
Oh
and
yeah.
You said you were happy that there'd been projections for Mars exploration. You were happy that the internet had come to the fore and had entered our daily lives, but you were sad about the way it was being used, and you were sad that we weren't in a phase where maybe we were 100 or 200 years too early for it to be used in a positive way that could actually, I don't know, create jobs, growth, harmony, fill in the blank.
Yeah. Well, I think whenever it would come, whether that were 100 years from now or 200 years from now, there'd inevitably be a teething phase, right, where we'd get a lot of things wrong, and that would be fully understandable. So I think it's a privilege to be in that time and sort of to maybe to a lesser or greater extent influence that, or at least, if nothing else, just witness it. Because I think it's going to set the precedent for the next 10,000 years. What the hell?
Yeah,
why not?
Why not?
Because it will. Because why not? Why not? Indeed. I think people look back on this time as sort of the birth, and it's crazy, really. You look at how much didn't happen over the last 1,000 years, and how much has happened in the last 100. It's crazy. I mean, Aviation's gone commercial while available. I mean, just don't even get started.
You can't. There's so much to say on that. How exponentially it's just
crazy.
Mushroomed. Yeah,
crazy. Yeah, so I think people almost, if they won't lose the record because they've got data to look back on how it happened. But it's it's fascinating. But what I was saying, I think, was almost a shame to, once the point of exploration, you kind of explored everything there is on Earth. Although people would argue there's still the oceans to explore, which is enticing. And then there's obviously extraterrestrial bodies. So your Moon, your Mars, I suppose, is number one on your list. But we're not quite there yet. So we're kind of in this limbo between the two. But it's also interesting to see the grassroots of, true interplanetary travel with SpaceX and Elon Musk and what they're doing over there with the Starship, which is very exciting. And I'm watching that very keenly, and some of the hops they've been doing with the Raptor engines. It's very cool.
Yes.
It's very cool indeed. Or Texas, very entrepreneurial. I love that he's doing it in Texas.
Yeah, in Texas. A lot of people are moving to Texas now.
A lot of people are moving to Texas, Leo.
Joe Rogan's there now. Is he there now, or is he's about to go there? I think he's
moved. He's moved.
He's done it. He's done it. Yeah.
He's done it. He's in this bunker. People don't like the look of the studio. Obviously, you can't touch the look of our studio because we don't show it. So yeah,
the production values are too high. I think people will be overwhelmed with our studio, so we just simply can't show it.
It's too much for your eyes. Maybe in a year, we'll see. We've been talking about doing the cameras for a long time.
We have been discussing it without any actual action, but
any actual action.
Yeah. I think there's something about Texas that inspires entrepreneurial spirit in a lot of people, because it's so wild in so many ways. And I don't mean wild as in it's just like a law of a jungle place. It's a microcosm of America, and it's all the extremes of America and the American experiment all packed into one little package there. It's all the liberalism or the conservatism or the wild ideas that people have, from space travel to hog hunting, is all squished into this state. And it's a state that's got a lot of arrogance, but in some ways I would say rightly so, because if you're from Texas, there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot to be proud of historically, and just in terms of the pulse of the people. So I can really see why a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators and weird and wild people are moving there. I mean, why not? Why the hell not?
Yeah, I've heard Austin in particular is a hotspot. People are moving there. People are sick of LA, and some of the policies that have led to sort of mass homelessness and also potentially perpetuated the problem. Interesting people, I think, what I've gathered from various podcasts I've listened to and opinions of people who've lived there, it sort of lost its former glory, and people are looking to pastures new.
Well, I suppose it goes in cycles, doesn't it? And there's cycles of real estate boom and bust.
Golden era, yeah.
Yeah, you've got like golden eras, you've got intellectual boom and bust that come with real estate boom and bust. And, that can be in any industry from finance to show business. But yeah, I think that a lot of it sort of comes down to cost of living, and also freedoms as well. I mean, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have freedom, if a place is too polluted, too congested, too unpredictable, you could be a millionaire, a multimillionaire, a billionaire, but you're not going to want to live there. You're going to want to live somewhere that allows you to reach your full potential and your children's full potential, right? So, yeah. Yes. I definitely got a good vibe from Austin. I spent a couple of days there, explored the sort of Capitol Hill district and a lot of the city. It's a sort of a liberal microcosm within Texas. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of tech companies that have started there or are moving to there and things like that. So there's definitely potential. I can see why people are moving there.
It's a beautiful green pastures, literally. I've heard it's quite flat in places, but beautiful steaks. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
I'll go there just for the steaks. I'm a foodie. I don't shy away from that. But Leo, also just going back to your point before I forget again, it was almost a shame also that I suppose I wouldn't see, like you say, the maturation of the technologies we're seeing in the sort of grassroots stage at the minute.
Yeah.
And so I think just the sheer potential of the grassroots technologies we're seeing at the minute, namely AI and space interplanetary travel, are just such a delicious and wonderful opportunity and technology that's just sort of in its very infancy. But I think I can almost see what a significant part of our lives it's going to be in the future, and it's just a shame. I know I'm not going to be there to witness its full maturation. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's what you were getting at, that the maturity, when the true capacities and productivities of these technologies are fully realized, you probably wouldn't be around.
Yes.
But I suppose we are witnessing some of the teething, playing with fire stages right now.
Right. And that can be one of the most exciting periods, arguably, because you have a lot of, I suppose, say over how the technology will look 1,000, 10, 100 years from now, right? Because it's almost like you set the coordinates on the plane. If you're off by, I don't know, 1/10 of a degree, that's exacerbated to like 100 miles down the line by a hell of a lot in terms of your actual coordinates versus what you were supposed to go for. So I think in the very early stages, there's a huge amount of leverage, almost a disproportionate level of leverage, the earlier you are in the technology maturity cycle, right?
Yeah, I think you're right there, and there's also definitely a sense of wonder that comes from not living in a time of this is the tried and tested, established way of life, established norms. Because
it is pioneering.
It's pioneering. So in perhaps 100 or 1,000 years' time, there'll be an established way of using AI, or perhaps there'll be a monopolized vendor that provides a sort of rubber-stamped AI service to everyone in their own way. And that could actually be, I suppose, another way to look at it is a really boring time, because it's reached perhaps its maturation, as you would say, and it's now established, and there's a legal framework, and probably government, as always, is in bed with corporations. So the government will be incentivizing people and corporations to use AI in one specific kind of way. So in another way of looking at it, perhaps AI is a more interesting thing to experience in the time that we're living in.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely an argument to be had there, because I'm just weighing up opportunity cost. Like, how nice would it be to see it? But like, you're never going to be at the perfect time. I suppose, you're born when you're born, and you make the most of the opportunities at hand. And I think there's a hell of a lot out there. So
yeah, there really are. But yeah, so I mean, the whole this is a really crazy topic, because honestly, Andre, like the whole definition of truth is being redefined, and I feel like we can't let that go unnoticed in these podcasts, because I mean, when we talk about truth, when you're a kid, it's really obvious what truth is, what's right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral, and that's instilled in you from your parents, and perhaps your older brothers or sisters will instill some of that in you. And I think that the world around us is changing at such a rapid rate, with all this information that we're being given from all these gurus, and bring it back to the strange gurus, the cults. Now we've got this QAnon movement that's popped up in the United States.
The what?
QAnon.
I beg your pardon.
Gesundtag. No, QAnon's actually taken some grasp in the UK as well, and in Brazil, and surprisingly...
Okay, I've been living under a rock, obviously.
Well, probably not, because I only found out about this a couple of weeks back. But definitely it's worth a look at. So basically it's a movement that is based around calling out everything as a conspiracy. So you've got...
Is Alex Jones running it?
I don't know if he's actually connected to it. He might be, but he's...
I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know, Brother Bear. This is almost like a separate... It's like a cult, though. It's a cult. So it's... And And I was reading a few articles on this, and some people were saying, in the past I've lost people to alcoholism or drug abuse. Well, I've lost people to QAnon now, and people are actually losing family members, like their 40 or 50-year-old mother or their 30-year-old brother to this movement. And
what's it based around? Is it just sort of an unhealthy level of questioning and sort of taking nothing on face value?
It's two things. It's exactly that. It's a very unsavory and unhealthy level of questioning. So everything is a lie. We're being lied to about the moon landing. We're being lied to about JFK. We're being lied to about 5G, about the coronavirus.
Oh God, this sounds like a breakdown of reason itself. It reminds me, harkens back to this destructive, and I think described by one esteemed philosopher as the most destructive philosophy ever, which was Dadaism.
Oh God,
Dadaism.
Sort of,
if I give you an example, it sort of reminds me of that. Like you show a Dadaist a chair and be like, no, why is that not a plan?
Yes. Because I remember in university, we had a lecturer who was actually.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Leo.
No. I just, in case you'd forgotten, we did have a lecturer who was besotted by Dadaism, and
who?
I'm not gonna say their name on live here, but in case I get it wrong,
call them out.
I'm not calling them out, partly because I don't actually remember their full name, but I know exactly what they look like, and I remember they had this unhealthy obsession with Dadaism. We went through an entire set of.
Can you do an impression?
Okay. So we were there, and she was like, we're going to put the PowerPoint presentation on, and every slide is going to show you an object, but the caption underneath will say something different. And then we had a picture of, I think it was a chair, and it said, this is an apple. And then next slide, and take a look at this pipe. And it was like a smoker's pipe. And then underneath it just said giraffe. And then, and then it would, and this was progressing.
So this is exactly this.
And these were innocuous objects. They were just innocuous. Like, look at this desk lamp, and this went on for probably 10 minutes. And I thought, okay.
And whatever was the
I don't know. But then, okay, just a counter argument here before we go down the Dadaist route, I think what they were getting at was kind of a what is reality sort of question. It's like question everything. Question everything. What is reality? Is empirical perception all that it professes to be? Are these objects what they claim to be, or are they actually charlatans and imposters?
That's amazing.
What do you think?
I suppose, there is. How do you define an apple? Is it the form? Is it the colour? If I were to make an apple out of paper mache, would you still call it an apple or a sculpture? Wow, they're onto something, man.
They are onto something with that. It's like, does the form or the medium by which something is given to you? It's like colours, isn't it? Right? It's like, is this yellow? This is not yellow. The pictures. I think the pictures on your screen or my computer screen we're looking at now, I think they're only in the primary colours, and
I think it serves as sort of a fundamental exercise. But you're right, I almost toyed with that idea as a kid. Like, how do I know that when my sister says this is red, how do I know it's the same red I see?
Right, because you see it the same way, but your perception of that colour might be completely different.
Right, exactly. But as long as we're all agreed that's red, it's kind of, then whenever they see that colour elsewhere, they will identify it as red. So it's meaningless, kind of, whether it's my red, it's their red, and we all agree it's called red. Whatever that colour looks like to their eyes is good.
As long as...
Because it all stands up.
Right. As long as you align on what the colour looks like.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that it may look completely different. I don't know. Maybe that's where they were getting at. I need to look further into Dadaism. I may be completely wrong here. I may be about to say something moronic.
No,
but
I think that's something quite different. I think what we're talking about is reasonable. Dadaism is it's not my favourite philosophy, that put it very mildly.
Now, didn't Dadaism have some strange link to futurism and fascism? I may be completely wrong about that, but I feel like
I believe it did.
There was a link.
Because there was a lot of artwork that was sort of looking at modernism, particularly around mechanical sort of cogs, wheels, spokes, that sort of thing. And it was partly sculptural and often sort of on a 2D plane on a canvas, but then popping out. And they would often depict mechanical structures and almost just fictitious machines. And I think it does have, it sort of speaks to that modernist aesthetic.
Yeah. I think
there was a band of artists actually that identified and came along with that philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that there was a lot of there was a lot of, it's modernism, isn't it? It's an avant-garde art movement. So there must have been some opposition to, the established order in Europe at the time. And there must have been some support for, anti-war sentiment that went hand in hand. So in that way, maybe Dadaism was consistent with, all these beliefs that questioned how everything had been done. The only problem with that is that leaves the doorway open for so many different ideas that could be harmful. And, fascism, there may have been a link to fascism there. There may have been a link to communism. There may have been a link to, other certain modernist movements that could have had a negative or positive effect.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was quite a dangerous philosophy in that sense, because it could be interpreted as there's no, I suppose, moral compass to anything, and there's no right, there's no wrong. And it's sort of when you dismiss that.
Yeah, almost nihilistic.
It is nihilistic, I think. I think at its core it was sort of nihilism, but disguised as something a little more sophisticated, but it wasn't. But yeah, fundamentally, I think it started out as an art movement, and it's kind of, a lot of it's kind of nonsensical, irrational, anti-bourgeoisie.
Absurdism.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, it spanned all sorts. It wasn't just visual art. It was sort of like literary as well as sort of sound media, collage, sound poetry. It really did stretch quite a few faculties across the arts.
But do you think it's harmful though? Do you think it was destructive and harmful?
I don't think it was a big enough movement to be destructive and harmful, but I think the underlying idea that you can kind of re-baseline people's thinking there's no right and there's no wrong, because there's no sort of, this is how it is and this is a chair and you will call it a chair, because we have to live by some rules. Otherwise, like you say, we enter into the realms of nihilism. And nihilism also, I suppose, is a fertile ground for even more destructive philosophies.
Extremism.
Absolutely, like fascism or communism on its extreme.
Yeah. So in that sense, Dadaism was a sort of artistic aspect of what could have been nihilism, or something with the potential to be very destructive for society, destructive for the bourgeoisie, which some people may have seen as good, especially if you're talking, if you're in the context of, early 20th century Russia, sort of the days of the Tsar and things like that. But then again, what replaces that? Is it going to be, if movements like Dadaism replace existing orders with things like Marxist Leninism or fascism, then what good are they really doing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Well, I think it also was ripe post First World War, right? Because it sort of stretched into the early 20s post-World War, and probably the horrors of the First World War probably just re-baselined and sort of threw everything into question, just the atrocities and the deaths and the I suppose the destruction that was seen and the amount of death. So I think there was a lot of probably negative sentiment going into the movement, and probably just perpetuated it. I mean, there was I've got a quote actually here from the American Art News, and it said that Dada philosophy is the sickest, most paralyzing, and most destructive thing that has ever originated from the brain of man.
Oh my god! Well, isn't that a glowing endorsement?
Yes.
Wow.
You can see why the American Art News absolutely endorsed Dada.
I didn't realize there was so much hate for Dadaism. I didn't realize.
It's a very frustrating philosophy. You kind of you can't pin them down because they're nothing and everything.
Yeah. I don't want to do that lecturer a disservice because she was actually a pretty decent lecturer. It's just she did seem to like Dadaism, so there's definitely going to be. She's probably rubbing people up the wrong way, you know, with the belief that Dadaism's a force for good.
I don't know. It's I suppose it's a useful it's a way of freeing yourselves from preconceptions, right? And therefore maybe quite a useful tool if you confine your actions to the canvas.
There was actually, you'll find this hilarious. There was there was a meeting of different artists that I was watching. I think it was some kind of YouTube video or something, or it was on Vimeo or something, and there was actually a Dadaist in the room, and he was just sitting. He refused to sit on a chair, and he was just sitting in the shape of a chair, claiming that he was a chair. And people were getting frustrated at him.
I love
they were
it.
Just like, can you just please sit on a chair so that we can have a discussion about, you know, where we want this to go? And he just refused, but he decided he made sure that all the attention was constantly drawn to him. And then he started to claim other insane things like, I'm an apple, I'm a lamp, I'm a cup, you know, all these kinds of things. No one in the room liked him.
I think it almost weirdly justifies its own existence by the outrage it perpetuates. It's like, yes, we're getting somewhere, guys. Look how angry they're getting. I'm an apple, for God's sake, call me an apple. And you just get offended when someone calls you an apple. It's like, I'm a pear now, okay? I was an apple yesterday.
You idiot, just keep up with my
see?
Inanimate object fluidity.
Can't you see I've metamorphosized, you fool?
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so it's great that you said that, Andre. Self-justifying outrage. And that's okay. There's a lot of gurus, as politicians, as lecturers in academic bodies that are using basically outrage as a means to draw attention upon themselves. And I think this QAnon movement very much does that. Whether they're aware of it or not, I think they're probably aware of it. There's the movement out there, and basically it's claiming that all the people in the top echelons of the media and politics are enslaving children and worshipping the devil. And the other thing that I was getting to before, Andre, was they all say the only remedy for this is Donald Trump.
Because he's anti-establishment and he's neither kind of Republican nor Democrat kind of thing.
Exactly. Because he's this sort of anti-establishment, anti-Hollywood, anti-liberal, what they would see as the mainstream liberal media. But also he's in many ways he's against sort of the conservative media. I mean, in his inauguration speech, he was attacking Bush and like the sort of Bush dynasties in American politics as much as the Clinton dynasties.
Yeah, that was very outrageous. I remember when he was saying that. And I haven't seen many inaugurations, or at least not seen many that I remember, and I thought that was a pretty outrageous comment.
Yeah, I mean, I remember for his security detail at the inauguration, he turned down the Secret Service and put in Bikers for Trump to form like a ring of bikers around his crowds, you know, and it doesn't get more anti-establishment than that, right? So,
yeah. But he revels in it, doesn't he?
He revels in it. But that's the QAnon movement. And it's gaining a lot of traction, especially in the States, a little bit in Britain as well. I think there was like a rally, or like a Save the Children rally with
and
QAnon.
What is it centered around? Is it sort of what they perceive as healthy questioning down to the bottom, and sort of if it's in any sort of official mainstream media, then it's probably not true, and then question it down to the ground and sort of any crazy theory is better than what they're saying.
Basically, questioning everything, accepting any conspiracy theory that's thrown at you.
Oh my god!
And so if you look at it, they've actually mapped out people's affiliation and interest with QAnon movement. Around the time, I think it was the time the world officially shut in, was it March 10th or March 13th? I forget. The membership and affiliation with QAnon went up about 700%. So
wow. So when was that, and what kind of a time span are we talking?
So this was in the past year. It was fairly steady, and then the year up until March. Then in March, it started to zoom. It started to absolutely skyrocket. So I'm assuming there's a lot of boredom and anxiety associated with that. And then another aspect to that is probably just people's fears over what the disease could do to their loved ones or to themselves. People can't work, all these kinds of things. Yeah. But that all fed into this 700% increase in affiliation with QAnon.
Wow. I mean, the trend is very obviously coincides with lockdown and COVID, and sort of too much time spent in one's own mind can sometimes be to the detriment of one's own mind, as we know. We spoke about this earlier, right? You kind of, I suppose you need social disapproval and approval in accordance to your actions, right? Because that's kind of what dictates what's socially acceptable and what's not. It's by definition, what does it is the mechanism through which we decide what is and isn't right and moral and good, and what's illegal and what's not illegal. So I suppose in the absence of that normal triage process that goes on sort of subconsciously throughout your day as you're walking and just being out there in the public, I suppose that not being exercised is almost like a muscle that's wasting away, right? And it sort of leads to a ripe sort of sowing ground for these sort of quite insidious but sort of ideas that I suppose at their root will try and market themselves as sort of being intellectual and questioning everything and actually a healthy way of thinking, but ultimately are quite destructive.
Yeah, that's right. That's very well put. It is a cognitive muscle, isn't it? It's like if you don't go out and run every day or do physical exercise, your muscle mass and even your bone density will start to wither away. And I think the same can be said, as you said, for the lack of disapproval and approval and external stimulation that your mind experiences. Also, sense of purpose as well. I think that there's a lot of despair right now. Everyone's evil, everyone's bad. We're not evil, but the people on the other end of the spectrum are evil. Democrats calling Republicans evil, Republicans calling Democrats evil, all these kinds of things. But I really believe that at the heart of it, people are good. People are would put their lives on the line to help and save others. By and large, it doesn't mean people aren't self-interested, but people are good. And I think when they have nothing to do with their time and they lose their jobs and they lose their sense of purpose in their communities, they start to attribute importance to other things that may simulate some kind of service or some kind of giving, some kind of hero complex. And for a lot of people, that may be QAnon. That may be, there's these evil bastards ruling the world, and we've got to take them out. We've got to expose them. We've got to vote with our feet. We've got to elect people that will destroy these evil groups. And I think there's that sense of service, that sense of sort of the heroic nature in the human condition that leads people to doing those things, and the internet has just made it come out in such a wacky spaghetti kind of way.
Well, I think probably maybe some of these people don't have jobs, or actually don't feel, if they do have jobs, don't feel particularly engaged in them because they're not at work day to day anymore. And maybe that, as a token of that, you sort of feel disenfranchised and disconnected, and like I said, that sort of leads to these insidious thoughts and thoughts that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise have had if you'd been in a healthy office environment and interacting with people. Kind of the day to day is there's more than enough there to preoccupy you, and there's or not all this sort of bandwidth in your mind, almost an unhealthy level of bandwidth in your mind to just perpetuate these ideas. Because I suppose these ideas almost look, maybe because there's lack of sense of belonging because you're not seeing as many people and you're all in lockdown.
Yeah.
You identify with ideas as opposed to with seeing someone for coffee or something. And it's almost these ideas become friends, and it's through the ideas that you make new friends online.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Oh, you might be onto something there, because I mean, look at the way ISIS formed in the West. It was young 20-something-year-old men that were generally socially isolated in school and socially isolated from, the normal rhythms of society. And they would place their emphasis in this extreme, hateful movement because, again, they wouldn't just be meeting someone down at the pub or for coffee or to go to the movies with. Take that and put that on sort of a global, like a worldwide scale, then you've got some serious social problems.
Yeah, definitely. And because you don't have society out there, and you're not out there and experiencing society as it should be, as in an arbiter of good and bad behavior, you're sort of left to your own devices, and left to your own devices unchecked, there can be some pretty extreme views that are generated off the back of that.
Yeah, that's true. The question is this a human condition, or is the internet and just the sheer amount of information? What is it? What's causing this?
I don't think you can disconnect the human condition. I mean, social interaction is so important. It's so huge as part of the human condition. And so when you unnaturally divorce someone of that level, that threshold level of required social interaction, then inevitably you're going to yield unnatural results, which I think is what we're seeing. And I think sort of a tight-knit community, which is what we're seeing less and less of, serves as an arbiter and a way of, I suppose, mediating behavior and what is and isn't acceptable. And I think in the absence of that, you're kind of, it's anyone's guess as to what monstrosity of a philosophy or a mentality or an idea could come up, because it's not going through the usual and healthy checks and balances it should be. It's just breeding like a virus through the internet unchecked and without proper social and real world checks and balances,
because the algorithms group people into tight-knit communities, mini communities of other people that agree with them.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's the echo chamber thing that Joe Rogan doesn't stop talking about.
Yeah. The echo chamber effect,
The echo chamber, right. And it's kind of your own view is thrown back at you, so your views are kind of reaffirmed. And it's a pretty unhealthy environment to live in, because you might think, oh, it's nice to have everyone agree with me. Wrong. You need a healthy level of attrition and different viewpoints to sort of, I suppose, bounce your ideas against and check the robustness of your own ideas and philosophy of living. Because without that, you're kind of doomed to go down quite an extreme path one way or the other and not have it checked. But what you need to be checked by reality as well, right? People, I suppose it could lead to quite mischievous behavior. If you're unemployed or on furlough, there's no sort of structure, societal or workplace, to keep you, I suppose, straight and true and running on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. I think definitely the impact of echo chambers on the internet is more than ever dangerous now, because people have all this time on their hands. I know someone who's actually ticking off the days, which is never a great position to be in. Wishing away your time.
Oh God, no, that's awful.
So that makes me sad to see, and I think that on top of that, this time is not being used necessarily in an effective way. I mean, when we think about people who are particularly dangerous right now, I would say it's certain groups that think that people with other opinions should be made illegal.
That's crazy.
I think there's a lot of danger around, the no platforming movements, and those groups, and I don't know, they could be on the right or the left, it doesn't really matter to me, but those movements that don't think that other groups should have a voice, completely overlooking the fact that they are taking away their ability to fight someone else wanting to take away their voice.
Yeah, it's incredibly short-sighted, and obviously they don't realise the full implication of the suggestion, because it could equally be turned back on them, right? The barrel could be pointed back at them, but then double standards are prevalent and everywhere, right? So that's not a surprise. But you're right. I think I suppose intolerance of other points of view is such a destructive and unfortunately prevalent condition at the minute, for whatever reason, right? And it's almost like you've got the moral high ground. I'm super liberal, I'm super progressive and all that. So by definition, anything you do say against this may be given as evidence. But yeah, it's kind of that thing is if you do cross that line or do dare to disagree with this point of view, it's almost like there's not a debate to be had for some people. For some people, there is no debate. It is just an absolute truth, and the truth is self-evident. But there are very few self-evident truths. Arguably, some people would say none. So, yeah, I think to sort of profess that you've kind of got all the answers is, one, incredibly arrogant, but also not very introspective, and not, like, I suppose, self-conscious enough to realise that no one has all the answers, and no philosophy, no, I suppose, way of thinking, or politics even, has all the answers. It's never the case, and it never will be.
No, because at the end of the day, the real world often doesn't align up with philosophy or politics. And
no, because they're simplifications of the real world, and the real world's far too granular and complex to be summarized by one philosophy or politics.
It's highly granular, and you can,
yeah, of course,
you can use these philosophies to govern, to try to govern your, the way you treat people on a day-to-day basis. But the world and life is very spontaneous. People are spontaneous. It's like you're driving a car. You could be the best driver ever. You could have the completely clean record, been driving for 50 years, and then someone else hits you. How you react to that and how you adjust and adapt and learn from it is completely up to you. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of danger, I think, in sort of the absolute truth philosophy, and I think that that's something that's common, certainly admittedly, it's on sort of the liberal ends of the spectrum, and I think aspects of it actually harken back to kind of the almost the medieval worldview of, this is exactly the truth. This is exactly the absolute reality that we all live in. And if you don't abide by this, we will crucify you.
Yeah, it very much harkens back to that. Actually, that's a really interesting link I've not actually heard before, and yet, sort of, if I think about it now, really obvious, isn't it? It really does. It is a reflection of that sort of sentiment, kind of obey or else, And, we're not saying that democracy or any philosophy within democracy is the end all be all or the way to govern a system or a population. It's just that there are some systems that work better than others on balance, and that's it, right? We can probably say that democracy on balance is better than a dictatorship because there's more people have more of a say. So that's sort of, it's maybe not an absolute truth. I wouldn't go that far because there's very few of those, like we said, but it's a truth, right? That it's sort of difficult to dispute that democracy kind of takes more of the populace's opinion of its government into account than a dictatorship.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
I think
It's a
there are
more dynamic.
generalizations. Yeah, you can make generalizations, but you cannot say that any one system or any one way of thinking or one set of values has all of the answers, because you're kind of, at that point, a dictatorship, right?
By definition, you become a
Right.
dictatorship once you become so complacent that you feel that your system cannot go unchecked.
Yeah, exactly. Because the moment you close yourself to debate and scrutiny, then you've kind of, almost by definition, you've become a dictatorship, right? What else are you, if not that?
You're penalizing yourself, and limiting yourself as well.
Well, you also, it's anti-growth and anti-development, because you're kind of closing yourself to healthy debate and rebuttal against what you think is right. And in actual fact, that healthy debate and scrutiny of a system that you believe is perfect will only make it better, and will act as a way of, I suppose, mediating towards a better, more wholesome system.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've seen throughout history, right? There's generally been less dictatorships over the last 100 years as we've moved through the century.
Yeah, definitely, especially in the West.
And then the Arab Spring.
Yeah, of course, the Arab Spring. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other side to that is, again, coming back to truth. What is truth? What do we take as truth, lies, and how do we constantly adjust our morals? Is some would argue that you can have that attitude that we've just discussed, that level of flexibility, but you also need a constantly existing bed of rules. That what some philosophers would describe as objectivism. So at any point in history, whatever the conditions are, whatever changes, there needs to be a certain set of rules. Otherwise, you'll just lead yourself in the situation of immorality and chaos. And for some people, that's the Ten Commandments. For other people, that is the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. You know, you have people that their views and beliefs differ wildly. You could have a pot-smoking hippie, or you could have an ultra-conservative family man from Kansas. I'm just trying to visualize them, two most obvious ones here. But they could both believe strongly in the Bill of Rights, or they could both believe strongly to a T in the Ten Commandments. So some would argue that you do need to have some lack of flexibility, some set of rules to go by. I don't know. What do you think about that, Andre?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to be values based if you want to sort of get the most out of life. And I think those values need to be sort of be stress tested on a constant basis. But I think at some point you need to sort of stick and have a foundation of values that are tried and tested throughout history, so you can stand on the shoulders of giants and see what's worked over the centuries and millennia, like you just said. And I think that's only wise to do so, because there's sort of some things that are just true, almost fundamental truths, although I'd shy away from saying that, but almost there, right? It's good to help people. It's good to, help the elderly lady down the, with the trolley down the stairs, or whatever it may be. It's only good and moral to do so. That's not a bad one to have, for example. But I think generally speaking, it's definitely advisable that you have a solid foundation of values and that you try and stick to them as much as possible. But I think then there's another layer to it, is over and above those values in terms of your opinions around superior philosophies or politics, that needs to be constantly stress tested. And I think it's only healthy that you test them with friends, people you just meet, and I suppose the more variety of people that I suppose interact with your point of view, the better, because it's just going to get you're going to generally become a better, more well-rounded person in terms of what you believe to be right and wrong, and also not become too dogmatic and too centered on a particular philosophy. And you've got to be careful not to adopt too much, right? In terms of other values or dogma or whatever it may be, but also have a healthy level of scrutiny there, and understand why you believe what you believe.
Striking up that balance and going full circle here, bringing in an Ouroboros of conversation here.
Ouroboros.
That's why I think Buddhism teaches us so much, because it's the religion of no religion. And the starting point of it is, here's some cool ideas that we came up with. Feel free to question them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably why Alan Watts has so much sympathy with that particular religion, because it doesn't proclaim to be the end all be all.
No, it doesn't. It's in a constant state of flux, and it professes to be that because it acknowledges that life is in a constant dynamic state of flux.
Right. I think there was even like an interview, I'm not sure who it was interviewing the Dalai Lama, but someone said it, if I were to show you scientific, irrefutable evidence that, say, reincarnation is impossible, would you look at it? He's like, of course. And I would, if you provided substantive evidence that's irrefutable, I would have to believe that.
That's brilliant.
That reincarnation doesn't happen or whatever. But I suppose there's a admirable humility in that.
It's incredibly admirable, yeah. The ability to look at what one believes and what's so dear to someone with scrutiny when new evidence. I think there's something very scientific about that, and that's why you can sort of marry science and Buddhist philosophy together in a way, because there's something very dynamic and admirable about taking in new evidence and putting aside one's belief system. Really, what I believe that boils down to is divorcing yourself from your own ego, which is near impossible and really, really difficult. I don't even know if it is possible, but it's an aspiration. And I think if you're able to divorce your beliefs when a new wave of information comes in, then you're divorcing yourself to a degree from one's own ego.
Definitely. Yeah, but I think the ego, if you're too centered on it, it can become a very destructive thing. Almost, if that's the guiding principle of how your ego feels on a given day, you're probably going to struggle to sort of attain long-term goals. I think you need to be fundamentally values-based as much as that's possible, and then be willing to change them and kind of be the arbiter of your own values based on your experience and interactions, both social and political, whatever it may be. Yeah. But yeah, I think the willingness and flexibility to change in the sort of in light of new evidence, then yeah, that's only right. Almost treat yourself as you would the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, to not to do that is almost to deny evidence and to not be inflexible at your own detriment, right? It's almost like if you cross the road and get hit by a car, it's probably wise that you go back and check what the root causes were. Did you not look right? And maybe do that next time. It's a really stupid example, but you know what I mean.
No, but I know exactly what you're saying. I suppose the issue I'm having here, especially with all these weird and wacky movements growing around the US and around the world, is how do we bring these ideas to the fore when we're bombarded with the echo chamber effect? We're bombarded with such a intense degree of division in politics, daily lives, where we're exposed to things like the rabbit hole effect with the way algorithms treat people. How do you see us as taking these principles and countering? Is it a personal change that has to happen to everyone, or is it about espousing those views actually on the internet? Because the internet isn't going anywhere. I mean, I would love to tell everyone to just focus on getting a library card and getting information from books. Not that that's completely free from bias, but you know what I mean. What's the method in which we could perhaps get some of these ideas across without being corrupted by the current state of algorithms?
Yeah, it's a difficult force to insulate yourself from, because it's so pervasive and it's everywhere, without social media or even just an innocent website where you're trying to book a holiday, right? Um, yeah, it's a tough one. You go back to print media, but then every print media allegedly has a political slant, one sort of another. I suppose you've ultimately, all right, if you've got a strong values based and you've tested it thoroughly, or as thoroughly as you can, then I suppose you've got to use that as your true north and your compass. And I suppose then, based on experience and success or failure, you can then calibrate that compass. But yeah, I think you need to take everything, unfortunately, with that much more of a bigger pinch of salt now, given the echo chambers, and sort of don't be too quick to jump on the bandwagon, and be willing to have your own wagon where you're literally sitting all by yourself because you're a libertarian, but you also fully believe that Trump is actually, for whatever reason you may have, is the right person to lead America. So I think it's almost the freedom and ability to hold seemingly incongruous, mutually exclusive values and ideas, whilst being able to justify them coherently, all underpinned with values.
Yeah. There's if you can justify being, an oil and gas man, whilst also being a tree hugger.
Yeah.
There's probably a way out there to justify that, and if you can do that coherently, and convincingly, then more power to you. Really, as you say, beautifully put, Brother Beb. Forming your own bandwagon, even if you're sat there on your own. Be your own variant of humanity. Be your own brand, or whatever you want to call it. Be literally your own person, because ultimately those are the people that make history. Really, those are the people that make changes. It's the people who there's no one else like that person on earth.
Yes.
There's no one else. This could be an Elon Musk or an Alex Jones or an Eleanor Roosevelt, or a Bernie Sanders. There's no one else like that individual in this present moment, and that's hard to achieve for a lot of people. But I feel like the good side of having such an abundancy, copious amounts of information, is that you can actually get to that level as long as you have a spirit of independence and personal sovereignty wherever you go and whatever you read.
Yeah, and if you've done deep, real examination into all of the various bandwagons and views and politics out there, and you don't identify with any of them, don't be afraid to kind of, sit alone, and maybe that's healthy, and it's almost like the immune system of society. You need to have those outliers. You need to have those people who think for themselves and hold seemingly incongruous ideas together, because it's what binds us ultimately. It's those people that stop wars. It's those people that maybe mediate and neutralize the acid. You can't have everyone in one camp and everyone in the other camp. A society split like that 50-50 is an unsustainable one.
Well, it just breeds
those
tribalism.
People. Absolutely, right. And rarely does that lead to good outcomes. So I think encouraging sort of people to think for themselves, to question everything, or have a healthy level of questioning for their own values, and then having done that, they can sort of solidly and happily say and sleep at night knowing that those values have been tested robustly, and it's something they can justify to themselves and others. And if they can do that, then like you said, put more power to them, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the robust stress testing of your views against others. And this goes back to brilliant, liberating document by John Stuart Mill I think it was written in the maybe 1802. It was early on, and he was advocating back then for women in Parliament. And this is at a point where 100 or more years before women even had the vote. And there was a bunch of other views he espoused, some conservative, some liberal, some completely out there from the ethers of whatever. But his whole shtick was basically, you're only justified to really fight for your own causes once you've stress tested them against every other particular argument or opposing force. Once you really understand the inner workings and mechanisms behind things that contradict your views, only at that point do you fully understand your own view.
Absolutely. And it just speaks back to the Jordan Peterson thing about get your own house in order, get your own mental house in order, get your own ideas and views in order before going out there, and make sure that they've been robustly stress tested before you even go out there and espouse them as gospel, or even dare to, because how dare you go out there and claim this is the one and only philosophy, because there is no such thing as we've said, but
no,
this is sort of the preferable. Even if it's the preferable thing, it doesn't mean that it's the right philosophy for everybody. It might work for you in your context, but let's be honest, everyone's got a certainly different context, even if that is my neighbor or someone as far away as Africa, South Africa, whatever. There are the circumstances leading up to the very circumstances I find myself in today are many and complex, and there are no two chains of circumstances that are identical. And so I wouldn't dare to say that my set of values works for everyone. It's what's worked for me so far, and I continue to adjust them accordingly if they fail me.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's like the race, isn't it? Like, everyone's starting at a different point or a different lap. Someone might already be 10 laps in. Someone might just be 1 lap in. Everyone's context is vastly and wildly different, and you have to allow for that context to inform their views. You can't rubber stamp. You can't have sort of a one size fits all belief system that fits everyone to a T. And again, that's why the open forums need to exist. Going back to the Greek philosophies that you mentioned before, it's very important to have those open forums, but also marry them with other things. Marry them with Buddhism, marry them with libertarianism, marry them with basically any belief system that advises against coercion.
That's right. And I think any system that detracts from radical transparency with people to people, philosophies to philosophies, debates, this has to happen. Like, I've been reading a book, Principles by Ray Dalio, which I thoroughly recommend, and he talks about radical transparency as the underlying culture that essentially permeates all conversations, meetings, and decisions within his company. And he's a pretty successful guy, so it must have a hell of a lot of merit, and it makes a lot of sense when he talks you through it. But essentially, it's getting beyond sort of the niceties of agreeing, and sort of realizing the merits of disagreement, the merits of having two radically different points of view, and then actually arriving at a far better conclusion than either of you could have arrived independently. And work in, let's talk about 2-3 people. He's talking about a meeting of maybe 10 people, and then you thrashing it out amongst yourselves with radical transparency, saying why I don't think your view is quite right, and this is why. And then them coming back saying, well, this view is quite different to this one, but I think if paired with this person's view could work really well. Yeah. And it's only kind of with that true spirit of collaboration fostered by radical transparency of the sort you don't normally see in the workplace, is the workplace example, but it could be taken up a level or up or down. Is the only way really to go forward. And it ultimately just boils down to radically honest conversation with, I suppose, oneself, because you have to sort of be open to being very, very wrong, and being able to taking a bruising on the ego, and then being sort of putting your hands up and saying they've got it right, or maybe look, the truth is, if we've got 10 people in a room, they've got 10 different views, the chances that one person has the whole truth are nil. So it's likely going to be an average of those 10 views combined somewhere. Yep. And where that pendulum swings is a matter of thrashing it out and being radically transparent with oneself and everyone else in that room.
I love the aspiration of radical transparency. I love that. And since you've been talking about that concept to me, and there's someone else that was on the Joe Rogan podcast that was discussing that, and I've been trying to put that into my life more and more, in, it could be in job interviews, it could be friendships, it could be anything. It saves so much time.
Yeah, it saves so much time dillying and dallying about niceties or trying to be careful not to hurt someone's feelings. You're going to achieve a lot more quickly if you're radically transparent. And trust me, like radical transparency by extension is almost telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. So help me God.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how this is coming back to truth, and the discussion of what is truth, because and you've got people who will always try and defend white lies and things like that. But hey, look, at the end of the day, I found, in business, in relationships, in any situation, if you're not transparent for maybe a few weeks or a few months, or in that moment, you're going to feel better because you're going to be emotionally or financially procrastinating. But then in a few months' time, everyone's going to get more hurt when the end result comes to the fore. When
exactly
the true reality is going to be far more hurtful, and then the byproduct of that is you've wasted all this time. And usually people who are not radically transparent, myself included in this, are doing it for the intentions of people pleasing. But once you don't do that, and then at a later date when the shit does hit the fan, you piss off more people than you would have done initially.
Of course. So of course it compounds. It compounds,
exactly.
You ultimately there is a level of dishonesty there, or you kind of, although well intentioned, is dishonest.
Of course.
Because where you kind of should have challenged, and where sort of your moral compass and values, I suppose, are braided against someone's view, you should have let them know that it is, and maybe then you would have thrashed it out and ended up with a better value or a philosophy for both of you, and actually ended up agreeing on the truth, which probably lies somewhere between your two viewpoints.
Exactly, and to adopt more sort of collaborative efforts that can benefit both parties or all parties concerned.
Well, there's nothing more sometimes more rewarding than thrashing it out and having a healthy disagreement. And if that means slightly raised voices and the emotions in there, that's fine, as long as the end result is there, in that you reach a medium, or you've both expressed yourselves both truly and fully. Then you're likely to reach a far better result far more quickly than have it fester and then come out as something far uglier days, years down the line.
Even if going right to the extreme here, Brother Bear, I mean, you're exactly right there, but even if the extreme result of that is you quitting that job and going on to pastures new and doing something else, you have converted that energy into something hopefully more productive and true to yourself.
And as with all these things, easier said than done, right? We can all sort of probably relate to a time when we're not fully fulfilled at work, but because of whatever concerns around job security or else, it's easier said than done. But so I think, although we know this is good advice, by no means do I follow it to the T all of the time at all.
No, again, you adjust dynamically depending on the situation and depending on what the outer forces are like. Only you truly know what the benefit would be and what the next best action would be. But definitely radical transparency on this topic of truth and what truth is in the modern era, how it's being distorted and how we can somehow avoid that. I really think that the sort of philosophy of radical and tactful transparency, I couldn't say a bad word about it, really.
No, there's almost nothing bad that comes off it, apart from maybe someone being offended for a day or a week. But what's that? When the alternative is, I suppose, not being truthful with oneself and the other person, which ultimately is what creates meaningful relationships.
Yeah, exactly. Beautifully put. Well, I think that's all we have time for now. I think it's time to wrap up this meandering, freewheeling conversation. This has been sort of an alternative approach, It's been perhaps not so much a little less scripted, but a little less Q&A focused. I hope you enjoyed it, Brother Bear.
I really enjoyed it. I was just frustrated. I was sometimes yumming and ahhing, but no, it's fine. I really enjoyed it, man. It was awesome, and I think it's probably what we're best at. And we'll have a guest sooner or later. But no, I absolutely love that. That's an absolute wrap of a piece. Beautiful.
It is. Well, I'm very glad to hear that, Brother Bear. We'll wrap it up now, and we will be tuning in a couple of weeks' time.
Oh my God, it's me next.
Yeah.
Shit.
You're up next, boy. Don't screw it up.
Don't screw it up. We're going to have a guest next week. I don't know who yet. Got to find them. Okay, someone off the street. Anyone. Hello?
Anyone. Just
All right.
a stranger. You!
Take care,
You'll
Bro.
do. Take care. Over and out, good friend. Pa-pow!
Kapow! Over now.